Hello, friends. News. Brick and mortar retail isn't dead. In this episode of the Innovation Room, we're taking a deep dive into exactly what makes some of the world's most iconic storefronts so compelling and what makes some storefronts flop.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Innovation Room podcast. I'm Rhianon, and I'm here with my co-host, Tori. Today, we are exploring how businesses can create iconic storefronts through effective signage. Whether you're a retail brand, restaurant, or small business, your signage plays a pivotal role in branding, customer experience, and even revenue.
So in this episode, we're going to dive into exactly why your signage matters so much. We're going to talk about some of the numbers, the statistics that support investing in your signage, and then also some real-world examples of brands that have truly mastered the art of the storefront. This is a two-part series on iconic signage. So in this episode, we're really just talking about what makes an iconic sign or what makes an iconic storefront. And the next time we're going to dig into how to make your iconic storefront last and stand the test of time.
So we've talked about this before, where your brand in your storefront is your company's first impression. It's basically that 24-hour salesperson, and you can use this salesperson to create an average first impression on potential customers, or you can use it to create compelling or even iconic storefront. So when I was looking at this topic and we were talking about it and I saw iconic storefronts, I was like, okay, that's a big word. What does that mean? And so before we dive in a little bit more, I was like, I'm going to look up iconic and what that means. So iconic means widely recognized and well-established, often representing a particular time or idea, something so admired that it could be subject or an icon. So when you think about your brand and your company, that's really what we all want, right? We want to be noticed, we want to represent, and we want to be widely recognized. So it makes sense that you called it iconic storefront.
Iconic. And I think the really key part of iconic is that it truly stands the test of time, right? So when I think of people who are iconic, more of a modern day example, I would say Taylor Swift is pretty iconic, right? Love her or hate her, girl knows what she's doing when it comes to personal branding, right? And she's been a hugely popular artist for a decade and a half. I think in 2020, she was like the pop artist of the decade. So she has nailed iconic. You think of other music artists like, I don't know, the Eagles are pretty iconic. Journey is pretty iconic. Those are
The Beatles.
brands. The Beatles. Oh, that's probably like the best example. Yeah, totally. Of people who have just really nailed that, whether you're branding your person or a group of people or a band or whatever, everybody knows who the Beatles are. People still listen to their music. I think that will be true of Taylor Swift in 20 years. So that's what we are talking about when we say iconic, right? These brands, this image, this feeling that you get when you think about the brand that stands the test of time. And there are some brands that have captured that really well. And we're going to talk about those in this episode. But before we dig into that, we wanted to talk about the numbers. And we've touched on this in previous episodes, but I do think it bears repeating because these numbers really show how much signage can impact traffic and sales. And I think it might surprise you if you're not familiar with some of these numbers. So there was a FedEx survey a number of years ago that found that roughly 76% of consumers, or about 8 in 10 consumers, have entered a store that they've never visited before based purely on its signage. And signage is not something that that a consumer is actively thinking about. Gee, that's a beautiful sign. I think I'll go inside. But it's the impression that the sign gives about the quality of the store that makes that person want to go inside. So it's not
just like
necessarily
a salesperson.
Yeah,
most people are really put off by pushy salespeople or people that are in your face. It's more of the subconscious, the people that connect with you on a level that you didn't really understand. They had that, there's something in common, whatever it may be. It's just the same with the signage. It's almost a subconscious thought that you're not really thinking, oh yeah, that sign's awesome, just like you said, Tori. But it's more of, hey, either A, I recognize that, I want to see that, I want to see what's in there, or it's more, that's really neat, that's drawing me in. And you don't even realize that it is the sign
Yeah.
that's pulling you into that store.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to frame it, honestly. Thinking about your sign as the first step in building the relationship with that customer, right? If we're going to treat our signage like our salesperson, this is your first touch point, your first step in building that relationship and hopefully toward getting that person to buy something from you. So that same survey that I mentioned just a little bit ago also revealed that nearly 68% of consumers have purchased a product or a service because a sign caught their eye. If you're anything like me, it could be because it's on the sale rack, right? And there was a great sale going on. But signage inside the store also plays a critical role in getting consumers and customers to want to buy from you. And then a study from the Sign Research Foundation showed that about 60% of businesses who enhanced their signage did things to improve it, whether it was maybe totally replace it or clean it or fix lights, whatever that is, they had an average positive boost in sales of about 10%. So that's pretty significant. We've talked about that statistic before on this podcast, right? If your brand is bringing in $100,000 a month in one location, you fix your signage, you're probably going to have an increase of about $10,000 or more in sales for that location. That's a pretty significant change. So it's definitely worth thinking about. So talking about some of these broad examples, Rhi, what are some of the brands that come to mind for you when you think about iconic storefronts?
So those are the ones, just like you talked about the iconic people like Taylor Swift or the Beatles. It's almost one of those things, like you said, that stands the test of time or that is recognized, even if it's something that you don't necessarily own or have. It's just there. You know what it is. So in regards to Apple, we all know the Apple logo for Apple stores. It's minimalist yet instantly recognizable. The glass cube entrance on Fifth Avenue store in New York City. I'm a Droid person. I have a Google phone specifically, so that's what I was saying. But I know exactly what that means. I know exactly what that logo is. And it is iconic. And it's one of those things that the next one is McDonald's, where it doesn't matter if you're 85 or 5, you still know what the golden arches are. And how long, I don't know exactly. I don't have the stat on that, how long McDonald's has been in business, but talk about standing the test of time. And we all want that recognizable logo or brand and what it does for us. So obviously McDonald's is one of the most iconic signs globally, not just for us internally in America, but all of them. Some other ones, Nike, the Nike swoosh, is a huge one. It's so fun to play those games where they put the logos out there and guess what the company is? Or the brands that have become like Kleenex, which that's actually the brand name, but that's what we call all of the Kleenex instead of tissues. Most of the time it's Kleenex. Can I have a Kleenex? So I think that's every company's goal at some point in time is to strive for that recognition. And it really does start with the signage. It really does start with that logo and making sure that it is consistent across all of your locations, across all of your stores. And that's why we see a lot of brand refreshes. So where we want to update, the McDonald's is still the same arch that it's always been, but definitely you see a lot of the store refreshes in that just updated signage to make it look a little bit more modern. We still recognize it, but it's just that fresh pop look that catches people's eyes. So any other for you that stand out, Tori?
There are so many. I think thinking about Fifth Avenue is a great one. I love Audrey Hepburn. And so Breakfast at Tiffany's is a great movie. And I think that the Tiffany's storefront is pretty iconic, right? So there's a picture of me from years ago of having a breakfast sandwich in front of the Tiffany's store and the sign and everything. So I think that there are some like that where there's maybe a particular location that's really iconic, or you have more of a brand like McDonald's where they've so saturated the fast food market that even if you don't love McDonald's, you still know the brand and it's a safe fallback if you're needing some quick food, right? So love them or hate them, they've nailed the iconic signage, the iconic kind of on-site footprint that brands, big or small, really want to capture.
And another thing to note, even for companies that are small businesses or only have 1 or 2 locations, with social media and different platforms being so huge nowadays, everybody has their phone out. Everybody wants to capture everything. I think people experience things more obviously through their phone than they do anymore with just their eyes, which is crazy to me. But even my teenager, they want a photo in front of everything. And when and they're posting on Instagram, TikTok, social media, anywhere and everywhere, sending it to their friends and capturing that. You want that brand to stick out, and you want to be that place that people want to take pictures. Just like you said with Audrey Hepburn and that in Fifth Avenue, it's means something to you. It's important. You want to capture it and make it a stamp on your day, on your visit. And I think that goes so hand in hand with signage, because now we've touched on this before too, where it's not just the storefront signage. There's so many places now in restaurants or even in retail stores where there's photo apps where people can stand in front of it and they want to post those, and then they tag the store, or they tag the location.
Right.
And that's huge. That's free marketing right there. It's a big deal.
So the biggest question of this whole episode is, what makes a storefront truly iconic? We mentioned some huge brands in the last segment, but even brands that don't have the same kind of market share that a McDonald's does can integrate elements of iconic storefronts to help their brands stand out, even if they've only got one location. And there are lots of different design elements that really contribute to an appealing storefront. So take this away for us. What are some of those key elements that people should be considering as they're designing their signage and their storefronts?
So if you're starting to look into what I should put on my storefront and what should the sign look like, and you say, okay, I hear you. I understand it's important. I want to catch people's eye with my store, but how do I even start? One thing obviously is logo and typography. So it needs to be clean, legible. It needs to be unique. It needs to stand out. It needs to have some type of catch. Also, just the psychology of colors. So you have bold colors that are attracting attention. You see those bright, one of our clients does the bright lime green, where the softer tones create more of a trust. Then you have the lightings and material. You have LEDs, a backlit. Is it a neon effect, or what's the ambiance? What are you looking for? Is it also integrating signage with the storefront? So are you using an element of the storefront to increase the design of the sign? Does it make sense with the landscape? Does it make sense with the facade around it? So there's so many things that you need to take into consideration. And I think having a design team help you with this is great. But at the same time, a lot of times what we run into is sometimes design and manufacturing don't always come together. So it can be great on paper and it can look absolutely beautiful, but can it be actually made? Can it be made with LEDs in it? So there's so many things. The size, how many bends do your letters have? The stroke width, all of these things that we need to technically think about when we're thinking about creating a sign. So there's definitely the design aspect, and then it moves to, can this be done? So I think having a signage team that is capable of design and the manufacturing technical aspect of it is a huge asset to you when you're doing this. And most sign companies, there are a lot of sign companies, ours included, that have a whole design department that if you have an idea, but you're not really quite sure where to go with it, they should be able to give you lots of different options. And a lot of times you'll have samples of letters and be able to look at different colors, different LED lighting, and how all of that should play out. Not all locations allow the same exact things. So if we need a sign that is backlit and we really like that, the ambiance and how that really looks, but not all malls allow backlit signage. So you have to think of also, I want the consistency of my signage across the board, but also does it look okay with a little bit of a different twist on it compared to different locations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a place where your brand's presence beyond your physical location really comes in handy, right? Because if there are restrictions on your location, like you can't have this particular kind of lighting, or they're restricting even like what you can put in your front windows. There are some, you think of brands like Adidas, right? Adidas is a super popular athletic brand, and at most of their stores, above the front door, they've just got their little, the three stripes. And it's not necessarily that the three stripes themselves on a plaster facade are all that compelling, but Adidas has done a phenomenal job of saturating the athletic clothing market with their brand so that people know what the three stripes mean, right? So if you're in one of those situations, how are you using your other resources to increase brand recognition so that when someone does encounter your storefront, even if you can't shape it to be quote unquote iconic, I think all those pieces really come together. And one of the things you touched on, Rhianon, was this piece of integrating signage with the storefront or with what it's got going on around it. That's a super common kind of architecture and design principle, right? That what you're designing, the space around it, it shouldn't feel like this random thing like sticking out like a sore thumb. You want it to integrate seamlessly with what's around it. I live in an old neighborhood in Houston, and a lot of the older homes are being torn down and they're being replaced with these, I call them big, ugly cube prison houses because they're very square and lifeless looking. And it's not my personal favorite as far as design goes, but they really stand out, in my opinion, in not a super great way because they're so different from the other homes in the area. And also we've got these big old trees. So it gives this kind of vintage type of, not vintage isn't quite the right word, but this just lived in rich kind of culture to the area that these cube looking homes don't capture super well. So it's that idea of what is the environment around your sign and how are you pulling on that? And I think one brand that does this extremely well is Starbucks, right? Starbucks didn't actually start their initial goal wasn't to have coffee shops, sit in coffee shops all over the world. They were just there to sell coffee beans, right? But they came up with this concept of the coffee shop, and now coffee shops are literally everywhere. But Starbucks does an amazing job of integrating really seamlessly with the environment around all of their stores, right? So you find Starbucks in strip malls sometimes, and so they might just have the really simple like white Starbucks above their door. There's a standalone one not far from my house, and it's mostly like a drive-through. So it's a very quick service, but they've taken their logo, it's laser cut metal, and they've like bent that logo around the corner of their building. And it's got this monochromatic elevated look, but it's so cool, right? And it suits the rest of the street really well. So Starbucks does that incredibly. So if you're looking for some inspiration, go check out some of their locations. They're killing it in that department. I don't know, Rhianon, can you think of other brands that do that really well? I think there are a number.
That's what I was trying to think of. So another one that kind of comes to mind in that is like Target.
Yeah.
You'll see almost like the mini Targets in like the big cities downtown that almost is like your Walgreens type of feel, but like a smaller footprint on that. And they just blend into that. But again, it's more of that kind of like we talked about McDonald's earlier, where it's that comfortable feeling. You know, Starbucks, you know what to expect. You know, Target, you know what to expect. McDonald's, even if you're in a different country and you see those arches, yeah, there might be just some different food on there, but you know what to expect. Right. And I think people end up being creatures of habit, but we want to feel comfortable. And I think that's a great example of your neighborhood and how sometimes the best thing is not always standing out as much as you possibly can. I'm thinking traditional is the word that's coming to mind when you're talking about your neighborhood. And then all of a sudden you throw a super modern house right in the middle of it. And that's sticking out like a sore thumb. That doesn't match. Well, you don't want to be that necessarily that company that doesn't match the rest of. And that's why there's so many particulars when you look at, especially like high-end malls and like outdoor malls on signage, because for that exact reason, they want that aesthetically pleasing look. that like
Mhm.
luxurious, rich feel, and they want everything to be cohesive, even though they're
Mhm.
different logos and different match. We've had obviously locations where all of the signage is white. So for
Yep.
Starbucks, for example, you just have that white storefront sign. So it is important to really look at every aspect of your signage. Who are
Mhm.
you appealing to in that neighborhood? What is
Yeah.
your what does the surroundings look like? Is it something that you can use the architecture of the surrounding buildings or feeling of that neighborhood? And it really also depends on what type of business you are, because there are
Mhm.
specific times where you do
Mhm.
want to stick out like a sore thumb. I mean, I'm thinking of Chuck E. Cheese or something
Yeah.
along those
Yeah.
lines, like where yeah, you do want to stick out. You do want to be that different that different sign. So it really
Right.
depends on who you are, what you're doing. But all of this to say that it's just super important, and there's so many things to go into it that go into it. And also just the perspective of thinking
Mm.
about how other people are going to perceive me, my business, my what we do, the quality, and all
Mhm.
of the above. We were just talking to a client and talking about the quality and how signage can deter or increase that foot traffic. Do people feel warm and cozy and safe? Do they think the quality is going to be good when your signage is flickering and it looks crazy? It
Mhm.
doesn't match everything else. Well, that's a little strange. That's a little weird. So yeah, there's so many things that you need to think about when doing this, but I think those are a couple good examples. Okay, Tori, now that we talked about what works for signage, obviously we have to talk about what doesn't work.
Yeah.
So many storefronts do fail to make an impact, or worse, they repel customers because of a lot of common mistakes. So, what are some of those common mistakes?
Yeah, I think the biggest one and the one that research has shown that consumers value or something that deters them or repels them is when you've got cluttered or confusing signage, right? So if you're trying to overload your sign with too much information or you've got inconsistent fonts or sizes or just signage that is not of a at least decent quality, right? Or colors that don't contrast well enough as compared to their background, right? There are lots of different legibility things to consider, but that is something that is very, very important. And like I said, research shows that it does impair people's ability to locate a store, right? If people can't find you, they certainly can't buy anything from you.
Mhm.
So that's, I would say, the biggest one.
I would say too, if there's just too many words, like the cluttered, I
Yeah.
think is a big thing. When you think about it's that initial impact and people don't have time. They're just constantly people are constantly searching, constantly looking,
Hmm.
and it's just human nature. So if there's too much, it's too much of a bother to figure out what it is. So that
Hmm.
I think the cluttered is a big one for me. I've definitely
Yeah.
noticed signage in the past where it's like, why are there so many words on that
Right.
building? It looks
Right.
ridiculous.
Right.
So I think
Exactly.
that is a big one. Clean, concise, to the point. You don't
Absolutely.
need, unless you're a very technical or detail and you really need your sign to say what you do,
Hmm.
um, it should be given.
Totally. And I think that there are ways to communicate what you do through signage that's not like directly above your front doors, right? You can use
I agree.
window graphics. You can use even like really simple A-frame signage outside your storefront can be really effective depending on your location, right? So there are other ways to communicate information that doesn't require you to put it above your front door. I was just thinking of a Western brand that recently opened a store not far from where I live. And I went in for the first time maybe 2 weekends ago. It's super cool brand, sell awesome hats, all this great stuff. But their sign out front above their door is, I think it must be their logo, but it's like itty bitty compared to the signs along the rest of it's this like classy, I hate to say strip mall, but a mall type of outdoor shopping thing. And so they've got this teeny tiny like logo above their storefront. And unless you're pretty close, it's difficult to read, and it's an intricate logo with different twisting elements and things like that. Very cool brand, but I would disagree probably with their signage choice just because
Mhm.
it's difficult to read. It's difficult to see. So maybe your logo actually isn't the best thing to put above your storefront. Sometimes that's the case. Again, think about Starbucks. Starbucks does not always have their mermaid logo on all their storefronts. And that's okay because people still know what Starbucks is, right? Even just with that really simple, those simple white channel letters. So those are important things to think about.
Also, it goes along, or it should be, we shouldn't have to say it, but poor visibility and bad lighting or just worn out looking signs. So obviously being on the maintenance side, we take care of these kind of things all the time. And I would venture to say that I would almost suggest illuminated signs for almost everybody, only because people notice things when they're driving around at night. When they see that, oh, it's that top of mind where they may remember it later. They may want to see it and they know where it is as, oh, I've been looking for that. I didn't realize it was there. And sometimes they don't notice it until it is illuminated at night and they see that kind of brand logo or whatever it is. So the bad lighting, if your sign isn't well lit, it blends in. If it's, again, you're looking, sometimes it's not necessarily just the aesthetically pleasing. It is also, does it make sense? Is it
literally? Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. So obviously worn out, faded signs as well. It just makes your brand as a whole not look good.
Right.
I don't want people to be judged on their signage for the quality of what's inside, but unfortunately that's the case. And it really is. You don't want your sign looking cheap or worn out because then are people going to think the stuff inside is cheap and worn out? So there's a lot of different things that we see that people do. Not updating your signage is one of them. Your signage is an asset and look at it as that.
I think another big one is when it's difficult to find the entrance to your store or that the sign, your primary signage is not near your front door. This seems like it should be common sense. And yet I think we've probably all had experiences where we're like, wait a minute, what door am I supposed to go in? Like, what's going on here? Even like I was just at a Panda Express a couple weeks ago and I used the wrong door because of signage or I don't know. It's just, it can create like a weird or awkward experience for people and it can even be a little bit frustrating and be a deterrent. So making sure that that your entrance is easy to find, whether that means some sort of architectural change or that means that you need signage to help you out to get people where they need to be.
Right.
In fact, we're doing a sign for our regional team is doing a sign for a local attorney and the entrance to this attorney's office is like down and around a corner. And so our team created some wayfinding signage for this law office to help people more easily navigate to that door. And so now it's pretty simple and straightforward. But before it was a little like, where are we going? What's happening? It doesn't have to be complex, right? But signage is there. And then when people are able to find your storefront, they're more likely to trust you and trust your brand.
So real life example of this. So me driving down the side of the highway, for example, there's two gas stations right next to each other. I'm driving, I'm by myself as a female. Am I going to stop at the gas station that has cracked and faded signs, looks dilapidated, and am I going to feel safe? Or am I going to go to the one next door that has well lit, very pretty, very nice signage? And again, it's a gas station. Quite frankly, they're probably the same on the inside. Got to use the restroom real quick, maybe get a snack. But I am 100% as a female driving by myself going to stop at the well lit one, the one that is bright and shiny compared to, because it gives you that feeling immediately. And that's something to think about as brand. Whether you're restaurant, retail, if the storefront doesn't match what you want to show on the inside, then there's a problem. There's definitely a problem there. Another one is Kmart's outdated signage. So you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I remember Kmart mostly, honestly, from when I was a much smaller human. So before it just declined a lot of Kmart locations had this really like faded, poorly lit, dirty looking signage. And for a brand that was already struggling to stay afloat, having their signage look so terrible certainly was not to their advantage. And it's possible, if not probable, that they weren't in a financial position to really clean up some of that signage. But when you compare to Kmart to a Target or a Walmart, right, where are you going to go? It's just like the gas station example. I'm going to go to the Target or I'm going to go to the Walmart because it's cleaner. The signage is fully functioning, right? Very basic things that it can help a brand can make a brand that's struggling go from bad to worse.
Absolutely. And on the opposite end, it can make a brand that was struggling turn around. It's one of those things that, again, restaurants or retail, if you want to attract people, one of the first things, and not a lot of people think about this and they don't realize how important it is because in your brain, you don't think it's important. I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, it's because of the sign I didn't stop at that gas station. It's, again, this inside warm, fuzzy feeling. It has nothing to do with my brain. Now, again, as a sign person, I think about that a little bit more. But that's 100% true. With you don't see Target sign cracked and faded and half lit. Believe me, I fixed them. They do. It happens. But that's a priority for that company. That's a priority to keep their logo and that brand bright and shiny. And it's super important. And you can definitely see across the board the companies that strive to make that logo, that signage, a top priority, and the ones that don't. And they let that signage get old. They don't fix it. They don't keep up with it. They don't clean it. All of the above. It can be a decline very quickly, unfortunately.
So again, we've talked about a lot of these things on the podcast before. This is just a more concentrated conversation about it. But I don't think that any conversation about storefronts and signage is really complete unless we talk about digital signage. So it's revolutionizing storefronts. It's been revolutionizing storefronts, but there's still more in this space. So digital signage just really offers dynamic, engaging customer experiences. We're gonna dig into that a little bit. Rhi, can you tell us about some of the numbers behind what kind of value digital signage can add to a storefront?
So one of the stats is digital signs capture 400% more views than static signs.
That's literally an insane statistic. Like, insane.
I'm sitting here thinking about that and I'm like, what that really? Does it really capture more views on me? That's crazy to think about, but it is true. And 80% of customers choose to enter stores after seeing digital signage. That's, again, that's a big number.
That's a big difference. If you think about one of the ways that brands attract kids is by bright moving things. And for kids, it's their lizard brain being like, oh, shiny punny. They're like squirrels. Adults were not that different from them. So it makes sense, I think, that digital signage would be something that really draws customers. And when we talk about digital signage, it could mean a lot of brands have what we call electronic message centers or EMCs underneath their like primary signage, right? So you think about a bank, they've got their brand, their logo right at the top, and then they've got that EMC underneath. And that's maybe talking about loan offers or different services that they offer, right? Schools and churches also commonly have them. They're talking about upcoming events and different things of that nature. So there's that kind of digital sign. And then there's also the digital sign that's, you think of more almost like a flat screen TV, right? That's going to give you those really high resolution graphics that are even more dynamic than probably what you would get with a lot of EMC sign solutions. So different options out there.
So are we talking about digital signage for the actual storefront sign?
Yeah, as a part of the storefront.
Okay. Yeah. So are there some real life because I'm trying to rack in my brain right now. Okay. Thinking about digital signage, we see it all the time, obviously, and it is attracting these customers, but what are some real life examples of this?
Yeah. So I think you definitely see digital signage, and I would say interactive digital signage more on the interior of a location, right? But digital signage is still used in a number of brands' actual storefronts, right? Where you see it through that front glass window. I think it's very common for sports brands to do this, or like athletic brands. Nike, we've mentioned, Adidas, we've mentioned. And so you're going to see those flashy graphics of all of the sweet new, I'm not a sneakerhead, but what are they? The Michael Jordan, the Jays. Is that what the Jays. So you're going to see all of these really cool, slick product features in that digital signage, right? Or maybe you're using that digital signage to scroll through like different sales that are going on. I do think that when it comes to the literal storefront, it's more common and at this point probably cheaper for some brands to keep the actual like window graphics or those vinyl applications on their storefronts. But we're seeing more and more of digital signage being used in that storefront. We can talk about it in that sense, but there are lots of ways to integrate digital signage into the interior of your store as well. And I can talk about that if we think that's of interest to folks. A little bit.
Something that just popped into my head with digital signage that everybody would recognize would be like football stadiums or basketball arenas when you're doing concerts. Think about the difference that digital signage and those huge screens make in that type of setting. And obviously it's there to hype you up. It's there to everybody, you'll have the scream or it's flashing or it's showing what's going on the field or the floor. But at the same time, you have that going on in different stores and different retail spaces as well. For example, Sephora and their personalized product recommendations versus via the digital signage, virtual try-ons, things along those lines, and the transition from in-store to digital purchasing and how easy they're making that. And as a female, a lot of those products are not cheap. Having those recommendations and thinking about those things ahead of time before I spend my money on it is really good. Yeah. And again, it improves my experience as a client in that store, just like with the huge basketball and football arenas. They're getting money. They want to attract the most fans that they possibly can, obviously, and that experience for them. And we do some digital signage for sports arenas as well, and thinking about that, but it makes a huge impact when you go into an arena with a brand new digital display versus a more outdated arena and what that customer experience looks like. So digital signage, we've talked before, but it can be iconic. Another place you see this a lot used is
Tesla.
New York.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Tesla, but Tesla.
Okay.
New York.
Tesla. Go ahead, talk about Tesla.
No, all the above. So Tesla, right? If you've ever been inside of a Tesla, or maybe you own one, right? The interior of the Tesla is iconic and recognizable because pretty much the entire dashboard is a screen, right? So Tesla is the perfect brand to use digital signage, right? It really promotes the digital signage itself without even any of the messaging or the branding that goes on the sign, already is communicating that tech forward approach that they have with their products, right? Tesla does a great job of using digital displays in their storefront, but then also it's a part of your experience once you're actually inside the dealership, right? You can try on different customizations for your car using their touchscreen signage. There's tons of applications that they use it for. So it's a great example, but talk about New York.
Times Square.
Yep.
Look at the digital signage that you see there. And these are sometimes the biggest brands that you see. And it's amazing to stand there and look at all the technology that is just flashing before you and how, again, that impact, that experience that you look for. And I think more and more brands are leaning into this and saying, okay, how can I use this technology to make that impact on my client and to be iconic? And I would say Times Square is pretty iconic.
Yes. One of the probably most signage-wise, one of the most iconic places in the world. The Las Vegas Strip is another one that probably has a little bit less digital signage than New York does, but still pretty saturated over there on the Strip. And again, great job of using flashy visuals to get people to come in and see what the latest show is or go to that steak restaurant or whatever it is. So it's 400% higher, more views than your traditional signage. So it's definitely something to consider. Even investing in it on a small scale can be really, really beneficial for your brand.
Just like the AI, it's something that you need to look into, because if you get behind and you get left in the dust, you won't take a piece of that 400 potential views, and everybody needs that and wants that.
Don't be Kmart, I think is what we're saying.
Kmart.
Don't be Kmart. Bless them, but don't be Kmart.
All right, so what is the key takeaway here? Basically, your sign is your silent salesman. It should be an inviting brand representative designed to convert passerbyers to customers. Whether it's static signage or high-tech digital displays, investing in your storefront signs pays off 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all stay tuned for part 2 of this iconic signage series. Next time, we're going to discuss best practices for sign maintenance, and then how do you take the stuff that we've talked about in today's episode and help it make your brand really last and truly be iconic in hopefully every sense of the word. Y'all don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you think makes an unforgettable sign. And until next time, keep innovating.